He was one of the most ruthless and brutal kings of England, and Henry VIII is best known for the fact he had 6 wives. His quest for a male heir and a successor led him on a crash course of divorce, execution and misery, and the lives of the women who married him were subjected to a huge amount of change afterwards. Henry VIII was known for his brutality, but he did have many mistresses as well as affairs with women at court, and many fathers and even husbands encouraged their daughters and their wives to take to the bed of the Tudor king in order to gain further promotion, favour and wealth. But there were some strongly linked illegitimate children of the king, and there was only one that Henry acknowledged publicly and showered in gifts, titles and wealth, and some even believed that the king was preparing his illegitimate son for kingship. But what about the other children who were rumoured to be fathered by Henry VIII? In this video, we look at and investigate what happened to the illegitimate children of the notorious Tudor king. And to support our channel, please subscribe. Firstly, the only illegitimate child that Henry VIII acknowledged publicly was Henry Fitzroy, a son born on the 15th of June 1519. He was suspected of having fathered many others by his mistresses, and more on these later, but let's begin with Fitzroy. His mother, Bessie Blount, was the king's mistress, and Henry was named after his father the king, and he was given the surname Fitzroy, which meant son of the king in Norman French. He was the younger half-brother of Mary I, and the older half-brother of King Edward VI and Elizabeth I. Fitzroy's mother was one of Catherine of Aragon's ladies-in-waiting, and he was conceived when Catherine was in her confinement awaiting the birth of a child, showing what the king was really like. His wife was close to giving birth, and Henry was off sleeping with his wife's friends and closest attendants. Fitzroy was born in a priory in Essex out of the way of the royal court, and he was rather quickly elevated significantly in the eyes of the king. Henry VIII was told that a son of his was born, and he celebrated it greatly and had his illegitimate son christened, and Cardinal Thomas Wolsey was appointed as the godfather. The boy was given a royal upbringing at a time when illegitimate children were shunned, and he was also part of the royal nursery and would often be seen at court. Fitzroy also grew up around some of his royal half-siblings, and throughout his young life, a huge number of titles were bestowed upon him. He was made the Duke of Richmond in Somerset in a huge ceremony, and it was stated of this that Fitzroy travelled by barge, and he came in the company of knights and squires and other gentlemen. 6-year-old Henry knelt before his father as Sir Thomas More read out the parents of nobility. This was the first time since the 12th century that an illegitimate son had been raised to the peerage. He was made a duke, and this was a huge honour, and Henry VIII was more than willing to promote Fitzroy. He was also made a Knight of the Garter, and also the Earl of Nottingham. The young boy amassed a huge amount of wealth despite being incredibly young, and he was even made the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. And there was some suggestion that Henry VIII was going to make his illegitimate son the King of Ireland. Henry VIII even considered marrying his illegitimate son to his legitimate daughter, Mary, the future Mary I, to strengthen Henry Fitzroy's claim to the throne. The Pope even granted permission for this. But at the age of 14, Fitzroy married Lady Mary Howard. At the time, there was much debate that Henry Fitzroy was being prepared as the possible heir to the throne, but his career and his life came to an end in 1536. For a short while, Henry Fitzroy became ill, and then he died on the 23rd of July 1536, from what is believed to have been tuberculosis, inside the walls of St James's Palace. His body was wrapped in lead, and was first buried inside of Thetford Priory, but was then reburied inside of Framlingham Church, and today the illegitimate son of Henry VIII is buried within the church there in a huge tomb. Now, as mentioned, there are other possible illegitimate children of Henry VIII. One of these is Thomas Stukely. He was born in 1520 to Jane Pollard. Stukely's mother, it's believed, was a mistress of the king, and he certainly had the king's red hair. He had a career inside of the military and would later, in 1558, be summoned in front of a council on a charge of piracy. He then later, during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, became a Catholic recuscant, someone who worshipped in the Catholic way behind closed doors, and he rebelled against the Protestant Queen Elizabeth. He was then actually killed at the Battle of Alcarquibe as a cannonball cut off his leg. Not a particularly pleasant way to go. Another possible illegitimate son was Richard Edwards. There was a rumour at court about his mother and the king sleeping together, and he was a gentleman of the Chapel Royal, and later became the master of the singing boys. He wrote comedies and songs, and one of his performances was performed in front of Queen Elizabeth I, and on this stage he fell, and 5 died because of the accident. But the play still continued on, and then he died roughly in 1566. Then there's the Carey children. Catherine, a daughter born in 1524, and Henry, a son born in 1526. These have long been linked as possibly the illegitimate children of King Henry VIII. However, these 2 children were conceived at a time when their mother, Mary Boleyn, was in fact the king's mistress. Yes, Mary Boleyn, the same sister of Henry's future second wife, Anne Boleyn, meaning that Henry VIII could have fathered his own niece and nephew. Both Catherine and Henry Carey, who took the surname of Mary Boleyn's husband, had red hair in the same manner as the king, and some said that Henry Carey looked very similar to the king and may have even been named after him. Catherine Carey went on to be a prominent Tudor woman, and she had a huge number of children, but Henry Carey experienced a prominent life at court and would be a patron of the Lord Chamberlain's Men, the playing company of Shakespeare. He would also be involved in dealing with different rebellions on the orders of Queen Elizabeth I, and she commended him on saying, "I doubt much, my Harry, whether the victory were given me more joyed me, or that you were by God appointed the instrument of my glory, and I assure you that for my country's good the first must suffice, but for my heart's contention the second pleased me. You have done much for honour, your loving kinswoman Elizabeth R." Many monks at the time thought that Henry was the king's son, but others have questioned that this rumour may have persisted because of the propaganda against Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII. Now, another possible illegitimate child is Etheldra Moult, who was considered the king's daughter. Little is known about her mother, a woman named Joan Dobson. The king never openly acknowledged Etheldra, but he did give his tailor John Moult land, and was probably as a way of looking after her. She was relatively wealthy when her adoptive father died, and she later accompanied the future Queen Elizabeth I into the Tower of London when Mary I had her half-sister imprisoned on suspicion of causing rebellion. She also was present at Elizabeth's coronation, but died the same month in the January of 1559. John Perrott was then born in November of 1528, and it was speculated that he was the son of Henry VIII. But this has been debunked by historians. He looked like the king, and was also similar to him in his mannerisms, and Perrott also had a sharp temper. Elizabeth Talboys was also linked to Henry VIII, and there was some debate about this due to the fact her mother did have a relationship as the king's mistress. She later in her second marriage married the son of the Duke of Northumberland, the de facto regent of King Edward VI. Henry VIII had a number of illegitimate children, and today it would be virtually impossible through DNA testing to see if the king's illegitimate children were actually fathered by him or not. Many of these boys and girls later had prominent roles in court, and for decades after were linked in some way to the royal family. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And again, thank you so much for watching.